Hello, Avamada readers. I'm Ratnaguna, and I'm with Advait Chitta yet again. I won't introduce him. I'm sure you know who he is now. We've done a series of interviews. I don't know how many we've done, but they're very enjoyable. I'm sure you've seen some of them. And today we're talking about patterns of the past. This was something that Advait Chitta contacted me about. He wanted to talk about this. So I don't exactly know what we're going to talk about today, but over to you to begin, Advait Chitta.
I'm not sure exactly what we're going to talk about either, but still, yes. Patterns of the past. It was an idea that came to me for a variety of reasons, mainly about patterns that we need to recognize that harm us or interfere with our spiritual practice in some way. The importance of coming to recognize them and to find ways of transcending them or transforming them. Yeah. And I realized it was a very big topic, and it might be worth exploring what those types of issues are, first of all. And that in itself will probably take hours of discussion, actually. So there are patterns, for example, from our own childhood, shall we say, that we bring with us into our adult life, and those patterns can be helpful or harmful. And I'm thinking particularly here of the harmful ones that come from, say, abuse that we've experienced in childhood, for example, that affect how we interact with other people, affect how we interact with ourselves, affect our emotional expression, what emotions we can feel, for example. And the importance for people, not just people following the spiritual life, but people generally, of being able to recognize, if you like, the patterns in those from those childhood experiences that they bring with them, and in order to overcome them and live a sort of happier, more fulfilled life through doing so. But then I was thinking there are all sorts of other patterns that we can encounter, things from the past in some way or another, not necessarily our past, but, for example, our past as a species. And here I'm thinking of a classic sort of legendary picture of the Buddha sitting under the Bodhi tree and Mara attacking him. And Mara attacks him, with his daughters and, if you like, his sort of aggressive forces. And actually, what is that about? Well, it's about actually recognizing basic patterns in us, sexuality and aggression, and being able to transcend them, as the Buddha did. Yeah. So that's patterns from our own evolutionary history, but then there are patterns that come from our culture that influence how we see the world, how we interact with the world, how we respond to people. And they can be very important too. We don't necessarily know we've got them or where they come from even. And they might be patterns from 1,000 years ago or more that still influence our thinking, our feeling, our behaviours. So there are those patterns, and then there's basic patterns of our own, if you like, skillfulness and unskillfulness, and the need to recognise them and improve the skillfulness. Yeah, and even patterns from past lives. I'm sort of very struck reading the work of people like Ian Stevenson, Jim Tucker, about how people can bring ways of being, ways of responding to the world that actually come from a previous life. Even a trauma in a previous life can affect them. Yeah. So there are all these sorts of patterns that I begin to think, yes, we need need at some point in our spiritual life to be able to identify and then to be able to actually work with, as I say, in order to transform them or transcend them.
That's quite a lot. I have an image of patterns based on or meshing with other patterns, meshing.
Yeah.
So you're sort of caught in I have an idea of a 3D kind of patterns, meshing on others and meshing on others. And then I'm also thinking of personality type patterns as well.
Oh, indeed, yes.
Meshed with those.
Oh, yes, yes, a lot. And they interact and overlap and affect each other in various ways. And the more I thought about it, the more complex it seems to get. But it actually, I think, is an important issue for helping people to progress in their spiritual lives. In other words, to overcome, basic emotional patterns and ways of understanding people that actually inhibit their spiritual friendships and inhibit their abilities to meditate or practice skillfully. Yeah.
Yes. You say that certain patterns may inhibit spiritual friendships, but I would imagine there's another side to that maybe the importance of spiritual friendship. One of the important aspects of it is that without spiritual friendship, you may not realize that there's a pattern or a number of patterns that are holding you back.
Oh, indeed. Yes. I think spiritual friendship is a way of discovering such patterns. Yes. And then sort of hopefully working upon them. Yeah. I think similar things happen in important relationships for people out, not in the spiritual life. Sort of close friendships or sexual relationships, the patterns arise in them and get in the way and can sort of ruin the relationship or stop it progressing unless the people recognize it and are able to work on the patterns. Yeah. So I think it's a very important issue generally for people.
Yes. But when you look back at the ancient texts, you don't really see any aspect of that. It looks more simple. When the Buddha's teaching people or when Milarepa's teaching people, you don't see any reference to this, the extremely complex aspects of people's lives with all these patterns meshing on top of each other.
You don't, although I think I'm trying to remember Milarepa's disciple who sort of, went off and away from him for a while because of patterns he had that were inhibiting his progress. I think then they later sort of made connections again. I've forgotten his name now. I think if one sort of reads the texts, I think one gets a fairly simplified picture. I must remember lots of these things were passed down, by word of mouth. They weren't written down. And if you have an oral tradition like that, you have to simplify. Yes. And so inevitably you'll get simplified patterns or generalized patterns talked about. And I think, sort of one sort of generalized pattern is the 10 links, the 10 nidanas, yeah, or is it the 12 nidanas? There are different lists, yeah, and they tend to come down in standardized ways. Although occasionally in the text you can find other versions or shorter versions or very specific versions of, for example, how Pratitya Samutpada is working in very specific ways for an individual. Yeah.
Yes.
It's important to sort of, I think, understand that, we have to unpack from the principles and, and learn through our practice what actually you have to do.
Do you think this is one of the values of the study group?
Oh, indeed, yes. It can help, if you're studying well, it can help you recognize certain patterns, at least, ways of thinking, for example, helping you overcome sort of views that you've adopted without even knowing you've adopted them. So study groups can help with that, yeah.
And now that you have an overview of the different kinds of patterns, I want to ask you why is it that you wanted to talk about this now? What is it that's brought it to the boil, as it were?
I just seeing how important it is for people, sort of generally. People's psychological issues, for example, but also cultural issues and how they get in the way. I think these days, cultural issues are very important. We're getting sort of strong orthodoxies, as it were, imposed upon us. And it's important to be able to recognise them and be able to, if you like, disentangle yourself from them.
Give me an example.
Well, there can be, I'll give you an example. Well, this is a fairly specific example of thinking about power and people with power and how that power can be misused. Okay, now that's an important topic, and that people who are powerful might be people who are, very wealthy, for example, or politically well connected, or in a politically, important position. Yes, and it is a very important issue there, power, yeah, and its misuse. Yes, but how we think about that can be coloured by particular ideological views that we've got, which might actually have a very long history. Yeah, for example, people with power who are, have got lots of money. Okay, so one can immediately think, oh, the capitalists. Yes, because they're people with lots of capital. But then that brings in particular ideological issues like Marxism. Yes, but then if you investigate Marxism, you find that its idea of capitalists actually is an extension of the ancient Christian idea of the money-lending Jews. Yeah, so there's actually a cultural sort of meme that goes back centuries, which you're actually using and getting caught within, that actually affects how you think about that issue. It's the capitalists, it's their fault, so can't have capitalism, we've got to have something else. Can't have free markets, you've got to have a government in control. That's the type of simplistic thinking it leads to, yeah. Rather than actually thinking out the issues without being caught in those, if you like, ancient memes, with the prejudices and biases and the emotional attachments that go with them. Yeah, I think very important issues can be adversely affected, by such fairly ancient assumptions that are actually built into us. We don't even know we have them. Yeah.
Yes, so this is an interesting area where we don't even know we have certain views, which brings in, of course, the topic of the unconscious or the subconscious. And so some of if maybe a lot of these patterns, maybe the majority of them are we're not conscious of having these patterns. Is it really true that we're unconscious of some of our drives, or are we kind of conscious of them, but we're unwilling to admit to them?
Yes and no. I think
yes and no.
I think sometimes we're just not aware of them. I think on other times we're partially aware and try to deal with them in some way, like we try not to admit to them and try to understand them in a different way that lets us off the hook, for example. We have different ways of defending ourselves against, if you like, such half-conscious drives and things. Yeah, and it's important we again learn to recognise that we're doing that and find ways of just going for the truth. Yeah, rather than pretending, otherwise that. No, I'm not telling myself lies here. This is true or something. Actually, sort of owning up. Actually, I'm, trying to protect myself here from something I'd rather not admit to, for example. I mean, it takes quite a lot of courage to do such things, yeah, and to see one's own failings. And it can be a lot easier to project your own failings onto someone else, yes, which I think is done a lot in political circles. Yes, somebody disagrees with you, and therefore you project all the worst characteristics possible on that person. They don't just disagree with you; they're a baddie. They can't possibly be any good, etc. And at the same time, you're actually behaving towards them in a very unpleasant and biased way. Yeah, actually, you're projecting your own negativity onto them. Yeah, I think that's very important these days. I mean, it's been very important in the past. This sort of very, it's almost very primitive ability that we can have to project our stuff onto somebody else. Yeah, and I've been thinking about this and wondering, actually, although this happens in politically now, is it actually one of those patterns from the past that go back to our, biological ancestry? How did hunter-gatherers behave 100,000 years ago or 500,000 years ago? How does that affect how we are now? For example, do we almost immediately sort of divide the world into two groups, us and them, and project all the bad things on them? Yeah.
Yes. I was saying to some friends the other day how easy it is to fall into that us and them syndrome. So you disagree with a person on something, on an issue, let's say a political issue, and then it's so easy then to be against them. And then the next step is against them and their type.
Yeah.
And then it's my tribe against their tribe. It's so easy to do that.
Indeed. I think it's human. Yes.
Yes.
And I more and more suspect that's something from, our evolutionary history. When you've actually got, different groups that are actually competing for the same resources, and actually where if you're in your village asleep at night and nobody's guarding, then actually the other group might well attack and seriously harm you. They were real issues, yes. And I suspect that we evolve ways to think about them and deal with them, and those ways are with us now. Yeah, we're not necessarily aware of them, but out they come when somehow our tribal conditioning, shall we call it that, is triggered in some way. Yeah, because they were real issues, and I think this also relates to issues of paranoia and mental health. Yes, in terms of what's paranoia? It's being over frightened of other people. Yes, but our ancestors would have a need to be frightened of other people because other people could invade and kill you. Yeah, so it's no wonder that we've got that trait within us and need to recognise it. Yeah, we need to be like the Buddha, under the Bodhi tree, recognizing we've got that aggressive, fearful response in us, and not trying to pretend it's not there, but to be able to, if you like, connect it in some way, transcend it or transform it. Of course, easier said than done. Yeah.
I remember in his book, The Closing of the American Mind, Alan Bloom made a point which I thought was very good, which is whenever you find yourself getting angry or irritated by someone's argument, it's a really good sign for you to look at what's going on.
Oh, indeed. Indeed.
Yes. But before we go any further, Advaita, I'm just going to change to headphones because I'm finding it a bit hard to hear everything that you're saying. I wanted to go back to the unconscious again. I think a lot of my development, not only spiritual, but also as an adult, becoming more adult, has been owning up to my unconscious patterns.
Oh, yeah.
And realizing who I really am and have been for a long time.
Yeah.
And it seems to be true that ancient Buddhist teachers, there was no understanding of the unconscious. As far as I could see, the nearest in the Buddhist teachings was the anusayas, the latent tendencies, which is kind of points to that. But what would you say to that? Is there any idea of the unconscious in the ancient Buddhist teachings?
Gosh, I haven't studied that issue for a long time. I mean, people, 40 odd years ago were writing books comparing the Buddha's teaching with the ideas of the unconscious. Yeah?
Well, they indeed.
Oh, yeah. And you could say, that there are certain similarities, the sanskaras, for example. As our underlying propensities. Yeah, sanskaras in terms of the 5 skandhas. And in the sort of later tradition for the Yogacara, the store consciousness, for example, as an unconscious,
of course, a
form of unconscious of the unconscious. So it's sort of there. In some way or another, not necessarily spoken of in the same way, but there, yeah. I've always taken sanskaras as meaning, our tendencies, which we might very definitely not be aware of, or what's going on with them. Yeah, especially if you're very unmindful. Yeah.
The other thing is that. It suggests strongly to me that the spiritual path is not a straight one.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's a fairly windy path that goes over all sorts of terrain. Sometimes it's easy. It's a bit like walking down the middle of an empty motorway, perhaps. Other ways, it's a bit like walking on a piece of rope across a chasm. And you've got to know how to balance well in order to do it. I think it is complex, yeah. And a word that keeps cropping up for me more and more is complex, and that people are complex. Yeah, I mean, I thought that 40 years ago, but now I go, gosh, we're far more complex than I originally thought. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
and so's the spiritual life. It can appear to be going along smoothly and easily for people. They're developing qualities, and then they encounter a pattern that they've got to deal with. Yeah.
Yes. Talking of complexity, let's talk about the opposite of that, utter simplicity. You sent me a quote from Dilgo Khyentse yesterday.
Yes.
Would you read that to us?
What the whole quote or the?
Well, however much you would like to read us.
Well, it's very long. I'll read the lot.
Good. So
Okay.
beautiful quote.
Indeed, yeah. So this is from Dilgo Khyentse. The everyday practice of Dzogchen is simply to develop a completely carefree acceptance, an openness to all situations without limit. We should realize openness as the playground of our emotions and relate to people without artificiality, manipulation, or strategy. We should experience everything totally, never withdrawing into ourselves as a marmot hides in its hole. This practice releases tremendous energy, which is usually constricted by the process of maintaining fixed reference points. Referentiality is the process by which we retreat from the direct experience of everyday life. Being present in the moment may initially trigger fear, but by welcoming the sensation of fear with complete openness, we cut through the barriers created by habitual emotional patterns. When we engage in the practice of discovering space, we should develop the feeling of opening ourselves out completely to the entire universe. We should open ourselves with absolute simplicity and nakedness of mind. This is the powerful and ordinary practice of dropping the mask of self-protection. Would you like me to continue? We shouldn't make a division in our meditation between perception and field of perception. We shouldn't become like a cat watching a mouse. We should realize that the purpose of meditation is not to go deeply into ourselves or withdraw from the world. Practice should be free and non-conceptual, unconstrained by introspection and concentration. Vast, unoriginated, self-illuminous wisdom space is the ground of being, the beginning and the end of confusion. The presence of awareness in the primordial state has no bias toward enlightenment or non-enlightenment. This ground of being, which is known as pure original mind, is the source from which all phenomena arise. It is known as the Great Mother, as the womb of potentiality, in which all things arise and dissolve in natural self-perfectedness and absolute spontaneity. All aspects of phenomena are completely clear and lucid. The whole universe is open and unobstructed. Everything is mutually interpenetrating. Seeing all things as naked, clear and free from obscurations, there's nothing to attain or realize. The nature of phenomena appears naturally and is naturally present in time-transcending awareness. Everything is naturally perfect, just as it is. All phenomena appear in their uniqueness as part of a continually changing pattern. These patterns are vibrant with meaning and significance at every moment. Yet there's no significance to attach to such meanings beyond the moment in which they present themselves. This is the dance of the five elements, in which matter is a symbol of energy and energy a symbol of emptiness. We are a symbol of our own enlightenment. With no effort or practice whatsoever, liberation or enlightenment is already here.
Like, it's so liberating, isn't it?
Yeah. Of course, it comes from the Dzogchen tradition, and in order to get to a place where you don't need to practice, you've got to have done an awful lot of practice.
Yes.
It's a demanding tradition.
Yes. But yes, that's true. But we're quite old now, aren't we? I'm nearly 70. I expect you're a bit over that, are you?
No, not quite.
Gosh. Okay, so we're pushing 70, and I've been thinking recently, well, I've got to take that into account. What should my practice be now? And it seems to me that should be my practice for the past however long I've got. You have to take that into account, don't you? How long have I got?
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed.
And it reminded me actually of some of Shinran's teachings. He talks about Hakurai, which is the calculating mind, which is where you're calculating things for your own benefit. And the opposite of calculating mind is Jinen, which is naturalness, just pure naturalness. And he says, you can't really talk very much about naturalness because you turn it into its opposite when you start talking about it. Yeah, but it does seem that that beautiful quote was like the opposite, the antithesis of this meshing of these different patterns.
Oh, indeed.
We're caught in.
Indeed, yes. And it was, that quote and reflecting on it, most days that helped me recognize the importance of, if you like, negative patterns in so many different ways. They occur in various different ways. And we need to drop them. We need to drop the referentiality. We need to drop the fixed reference points,
Yes.
concepts, etc., that we hold on to without even knowing we are, that influence our experience.
That was a very interesting point he made about reference points, which is slightly different from patterns, isn't it? But holding on to reference points is a very interesting idea.
Yeah.
That's your reference points, and you're holding on for them for dear life. What it would be like if you let go?
Yes. Oh, well, what it might be if you let it go is fear. And you need to learn to deal with fear. But there he is talking about being open to fear.
Yes.
And I think that can be very, very important, that at times we just need to let go. But our natural tendency is to hold on fast. Yeah. I'm talking my own experience here, and having to go back to the place where I held on fast in the past in order to be able to let go. Yeah.
Yes.
But it can be very, very frightening.
Yes. Yes. When I was a young man, I think I must have been 21 years old, and my friend Papa Vajra was 18. The weekend of our ordinations, Bhante Sangharakshita led us through the Shepherd's Search for Mind on a seminar, which was Dzogchen, or Mahamudra, actually. And, we were both new to Buddhism, but he led us through this text, which was very much like that. And, now I'm thinking, gosh, were we ready for that? No.
Yes. Well, I look back on my own ordination process and realise, I encountered just such a fear.
Did you?
Oh yes, and grabbed hold fast, and it was actually a very important teaching that I had to think later. Why did I experience the fear? Why did I react to it by holding on fast to particular belief or particular issue rather than just letting go? That was actually very important, and to recognise that that's something I do, but it's something that other people do as well. It's we can actually fear the good and the transcendental, shall we say? We can be it can be so overwhelming. Yeah, shall we put it like that? That we just back off. Yeah,
I can. It's easy to see how the transcendental, we become frightened of the transcendental because it's a great, it's threatening to our sense of selfhood.
Oh yeah,
but
that's.
Why do you think we fear the good?
I suppose I was saying fearing the good, the transcendental as the good. Yes.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Yeah. The profoundly good, shall we say? The transcendental. We fear it because it takes us beyond our ego, and we're desperate to hold on to our ego. Yeah. And if threatened, it feels great fear.
Yes.
We have to learn to deal with that.
And coming back to patterns, then you've got negative patterns. You said right at the beginning of the interview. You've got positive patterns, which of course help us to move towards the transcendental. But you and I were talking yesterday evening about patterns of reality in a way, or patterns out there which are part of reality.
Yeah.
Can you say a bit about that?
Well, just being able to experience the patterns, say within your sense experience, I think is very important. To actually appreciate what your experience is, the sort of nature of it, even to experience what you're seeing. I think it's very interesting. Often we just don't. We look, but we don't really see. And actually, I think spiritual life needs to teach us to see properly, as it were, without things getting in the way. Bit like when somebody is learning to draw, and they'd say learning to draw a still life or a landscape or something. They actually need to learn how to see what's there and not what's in their head that they think is there. Yeah. And it's often we have these assumptions and beliefs sort of built in to us that stop us experiencing what is there. So, for example, it's a grey, dull day and you go out for a walk on the moors, yes. Some people might think, oh, it's a dull grey day, it's boring.
Yeah.
I come out for the exercise, but I don't enjoy this. Yeah.
I'm afraid I'm one of those people.
Yes. Whereas for somebody else who doesn't do that, they just notice the incredible patterns of colours and shades that are around them and are changing them. And as it were, the uniqueness of those patterns and shades, all those leaves, all those different cloud patterns and colours, etc., etc. And that can be sort of wonderful to experience, rather than, oh gosh, this is just boring. It's grey, it's dull. Ugh.
Yes. I must go for a walk with you sometime. I've been listening to Olivier Messiaen's music recently, and specifically, one of the things Messiaen did was he used to go out into the countryside and annotate the birdsong, and then he would come back home and he would write music based on that birdsong. And I've been listening to a 20-minute piece for piano and orchestra where he didn't do anything with the annotations except transpose them for piano and orchestra. There's this beautiful piece, and it's just birdsong for piano and orchestra, and it's absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous.
Yes.
And it gives the lie to the idea that some people say that contemporary music, which is dissonant, that people say, well, that's unnatural. People love music which is harmonious. They don't like unharmonious music because it's unnatural. Well, that's not true, because the dawn chorus is completely dissonant. The birds aren't singing in tune, and you can really hear that with this piece, and it's really, really beautiful. So what Messiaen is doing is showing us the beauty of this completely raucous cacophony. It's absolutely gorgeous. Yeah.
Oh, I'll have to listen to that. I don't think I've listened to any Messiaen at all ever, actually.
Oh, well, he's very mixed. It's mixed. But, some of his pieces I absolutely love. And, of course, he was also a very, very devout Catholic. And he was also, what's the word for it? He saw music. He saw it in colours.
Interesting.
Yes.
Yes. Well, if you're thinking of sort of music that reflects natural world, the piece that comes to mind for me, of course, is the Lark Ascending by Vaughan Williams.
Yes.
An absolutely gorgeous piece.
It is.
Which I actually listened to at a concert very recently, and yes, it sort of captures. The flight of the birds, but actually, if one stands there and just experiences, one can enjoy the flight of the birds, etc. When you're out on the moors on a grey day.
So when you see the lark, an actual lark ascending, do you hear the music?
If I want to.
Okay.
Yes, if I let my mind sort of wander a bit. Of to the, if you like, the connections people have, because
yes.
I think it's an interesting issue, that one. I think in some ways, the more we experience
So
world.
we've rather strayed from our topic a little. I'm just wondering whether if you had decided to write an article about this issue, patterns of the past, how would you end it? What would the point you wanted to make? How would you end the article?
Gosh, that's a difficult question.
Oh,
by saying how important it is, but how it's a subject that needs, investigation and mutual investigation by practitioners to help each other do it, through the process of recognizing such patterns and overcoming them. Helping each other with our individual experience, to help others. Yeah, I think it's a vast topic, but a very important one.
Well, as usual, it's been really, really good to talk to you, Advaita. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.